The wind howled across the twins as the rain fell harder, washing blood from stone, but in a twist of fate, the blade meant for Robb Stark never found its mark. As the Freys moved to slaughter the young wolf, a last-minute warning from a drunken, guilt-ridden guard who had grown to respect Robb gave him just enough time to escape the hall with Grey Wind's howl echoing through the chaos. Catelyn Stark had fallen, her throat sliced open as she tried to scream. Talisa was gone, stabbed, mercilessly. But Robb, bloodied and broken, managed to flee into the darkness. With a deep cut across his side and grief clouding his vision, he crawled beneath the bodies of his bannermen and slipped away with the help of 2 Northmen who remained loyal beyond death itself, Maege Mormont and a wounded Sir Wendell Manderly. They escaped by nightfall, stealing away through the riverlands, hiding in ditches and burnt villages. For days, Robb said nothing. The prince, who was once hailed as the king in the north, looked like a ghost, silent, shattered, and burning with vengeance. Maege spoke little too, but she kept reminding him, "You still breathe, my king. That means the north still breathes." Word had already begun to spread across the 7 kingdoms that Robb Stark was dead. The Lannisters celebrated in King's Landing. Rose Bolton claimed the north in the name of the Iron Throne. And the Freys, drenched in wine and arrogance, saw themselves as untouchable. But the truth was more dangerous than any rumor. Robb Stark lived, and with him, the spark of rebellion. A month later, they reached White Harbor under the cover of night. Lord Wyman Manderly, mourning the loss of his son at the Twins, broke down in tears when he saw Robb alive. He pledged his ships, his men, and more importantly, his silence. "Let the world believe you're dead," Wyman whispered. "Dead kings do not fear assassins." While Robb recovered in secret, Wyman quietly began to spread misinformation. He claimed to be searching for Rickon Stark, stalling the Boltons, while in truth he was rallying loyal houses behind the scenes. Robb used this time to heal, both his wounds and his mind. He refused to sit idle. His nights were filled with restless dreams. Of Grey Wind, of Talisa, of his mother's dying eyes. Each memory carved deeper into his resolve. This was no longer just a war for honor or for the North's independence. It was personal. It was about justice. And it would be built not from banners and songs, but from fire and strategy. He shed his crown and title, at least in public. Instead, he began moving through the north like a shadow, visiting houses, speaking to old bannermen, invoking the names of Ned Stark and his fallen kin. Many wept when they saw him. Some were furious at his earlier mistakes, marrying Talisa, executing Karstark. But even those who doubted him could not look into his eyes and deny the storm gathering there. The North remembers. Meanwhile, in Winterfell, Rose Bolton tightened his grip. He had installed his bastard Ramsay as the face of his regime. Ramsay, drunk with power and cruelty, began torturing loyal Northerners. Skinned bodies hung on the walls of Winterfell. The people grew silent, afraid, but not loyal. Fear is a sword that dulls with time, and Robb was sharpening his own. By the end of the year, Robb had built a secret alliance. White Harbor, House Mormont, the remnants of House Hornwood, scattered wildlings loyal to Jon Snow, and a few southern deserters disillusioned with the Lannisters. He also sent a message, one meant for the eyes of only one man. It was delivered to Castle Black, hidden within a scroll of neutral trade terms. All it said was, "I live, tell Ghost, R." Now, Jon Snow sat at the wall, staring at the letter, heart pounding. The ghost of his brother had returned, and the Game of Thrones was far from over. Jon Snow didn't believe it at first. The message in Robb's handwriting looked too real, too impossible, but Ghost reacted before Jon could even speak. The direwolf sniffed the scroll, then howled, a low, trembling sound that had not left him since the news of the Red Wedding. Jon knew then. Robb Stark was alive, and if he lived, the North still had a king, even if the world believed otherwise. At Castle Black, Jon was already struggling with leadership. He had been named Lord Commander, but not all brothers accepted him. Some whispered that he was too soft on the wildlings, too brooding, too much his father's son. But now he had a secret that could change everything, yet he could not share it. Not yet. The Wall had eyes and ears, and if word reached the Boltons or Lannisters, Robb would die before he ever reached Winterfell again. Jon sent only one message back, through a trusted ranger. The Wall stands with you. Ghost remembers. Meanwhile, in the north, Robb began training again. His sword arm still ached, and the scar along his ribs burned during the cold nights. But the pain was a reminder. He couldn't afford to die again. He trained with Mage Mormont's warriors in the forests of Bear Island. These women didn't bow to kings or play games of court. They fought to survive. And they taught Robb what he had forgotten in his days of banners and strategy, that war was won by grit, not honor. Winter had begun to tighten its grip. Snow blanketed the roads, and frozen rivers cracked underfoot. The North was starving. But not just from hunger, for justice, for leadership, for the return of the Starks. Old men whispered that the last time the land felt like this, it was just before the fall of the Mad King. At Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton continued his terror. He flayed servants for spilling wine. He hunted small folk for sport in the forests. And, worst of all, he sent ravens filled with lies across Westeros that the North had accepted Bolton rule, that Sansa Stark would soon be wed to him to unite the realm. The Boltons tried to use her name like a badge, but they didn't have her. Not yet. Robb knew he had to move before they did. He had no army large enough to face the Boltons head-on. But he had something more dangerous, surprise. In secret, he traveled with Mage Mormont and a dozen disguised fighters to the Dreadfort. They scouted the walls, mapped the guards, studied Ramsay's routines. Robb didn't plan to take the castle. He planned to burn it down and cut out its heart. One night, as snow blanketed the world in silence, Robb and his men slipped inside. The Boltons had grown complacent, too confident. The fires that lit the Dreadfort that night were not for warmth. They were for vengeance. Screams echoed through the stone halls as Robb's group struck down Ramsay's inner circle, killing. His torturers burning his kennels. Ramsay himself escaped through secret tunnels, half naked and howling. Robb didn't chase him. He wanted the bastard to run, to feel fear in the dark, like every northerner had under his rule. And more importantly, he wanted the North to see what was coming. He left behind one sigil, painted in the blood of a Bolton guard, a direwolf. The message was clear. The North's true king had returned from the dead, and he wasn't seeking forgiveness. He was seeking fire, blood, and a throne carved not from politics, but from the ashes of traitors. As word spread of the Dreadfort's fall, more houses began to stir. House Reed sent whispers from the swamps. The Glovers, long silent, began to rearm. Even the Umbers, thought to be lost to the Boltons, sent a black raven with just 3 words, the wolf calls. And across the narrow sea, in a city of broken chains and rising dragons, Arya Stark heard a name whispered in a dream, Robb. She woke with tears in her eyes and vengeance burning in her chest. The game was no longer about thrones. It was about revenge. Winter deepened its hold over the North, cloaking the forests in silence and freezing the rivers to glass. With the fall of the Dreadfort and Ramsay's narrow escape, fear crept into the hearts of the Boltons and their allies. Roose Bolton, cold and calculating, knew the illusion of power was slipping. His bannermen whispered behind closed doors. The name Stark had become a ghost story used to scare children, and now that ghost was walking again. Robb moved like a shadow. He refused to declare his return openly. Instead, he let the fear spread naturally. He struck isolated Bolton camps, freed captured Northerners, and disappeared before horns could sound. It wasn't war. It was a hunt. With every raid, his legend grew. Some began to call him the Ghost Wolf. Others claimed he had risen from the dead, blessed by the old gods to take vengeance on the traitors. The North had always worshipped strength, and Robb, cloaked in silence and steel, gave them hope again. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderley continued playing his part. He sent food shipments to Winterfell, smiled in letters to the Boltons, and attended fake feast days in their honor. But in his dungeons, he trained blacksmiths, sharpened blades, and prepared ships, not for trade, but for war. Robb met in secret with him again. Wyman was cautious but determined. "You have ghosts behind you, boy," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Use them. Let the world believe you are something more than flesh, something the Boltons can never kill." Robb nodded. "Let them think I'm already dead. A dead man has nothing left to lose." In the neck, House Reed stirred at last. Howland Reed, Ned Stark's oldest friend, sent his children, Mira and Jojen's cousin Darren, to find Robb. They met in the swamps where even the snow feared to fall. Howland's message was simple. The Crannogmen stood with the wolf, and they brought more than just spears. They brought knowledge. The Boltons had been moving gold south, smuggling wealth into Lannister territory. Howland had mapped their hidden routes, watched their riders, and marked their weaknesses. He offered Robb a new kind of attack, not brute force, but strategy. Robb listened. The old Robb had trusted banners. The new Robb trusted ghosts and whispers. In Winterfell, Rose Bolton knew something had changed. His bannermen grew restless. Some had stopped answering ravens. A few disappeared entirely. Ramsay, returned and humiliated, begged to march on the rebel forces, but Rose denied him. "You can't kill a shadow," he muttered, staring into the flames. "You can only outlast it." But Rose underestimated the North. For every skinned man he sent as a warning, Robb returned tenfold with ruined camps and burning sigils. The direwolf had returned, and it was starving. News soon reached Castle Black that the Dreadfort had fallen. Jon Snow stood by the ramparts watching the frozen plains. Sam approached him cautiously. "Do you think this changes anything?" Sam asked. Jon didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was quiet and firm. "Everything." But not all news was good. A raven arrived from the Vale. Sansa Stark was rumored to be in Littlefinger's custody, hidden among the mountains, paraded as a Lane Stone. The Boltons had started negotiations with Peter Baelish to marry her off, to reclaim the Stark name, and bring the North under control. If the Boltons couldn't kill Robb, they would try to erase him by legitimizing a false union. Robb burned the letter in silence. The fire crackled like a heartbeat. "She's not a tool," he muttered. "She's my sister." It was time for a bolder move. He sent out his first raven under his true name, not to the Boltons, but to the lords of the North who still remembered his father. The letter bore no plea, no flowery speech, just a simple message. "I live. The blood of Ned Stark still beats. If you are loyal, come to the weirwood at Deepwood Mott in 7 days. If not, die with the Boltons." The North listened. 7 days later, beneath the old red leaves of the weirwood, over 24 houses stood in silence. Some brought warriors, some only themselves. All of them knelt when Robb stepped forward, cloaked in black, sword in hand, scar on his face, eyes harder than before. No speeches were given. No crown was placed. But the war had begun. The North had always been a hard land, shaped by snow, stone, and silence. But that night at Deepwood Mott, something old awakened beneath the red leaves. As Robb Stark stepped forward, flanked by Mage Mormont and Darren Reed, the gathered lords looked at him not with pity or grief, but with the fire of old loyalty burning in their eyes. There was no need for declarations. Robb was not a boy anymore, nor a king with songs in his shadow. He was a man returned from death, scarred by betrayal, and more dangerous than ever. When he raised his sword in silence, each lord unsheathed their own and pointed it to the sky. No crown, no throne, just vengeance. The gathering broke at dawn. Each house returned to its holdfasts, quiet and ready. The North would not march in banners or sing ballads. They would strike like the cold, silent, brutal, and merciless. Meanwhile, in Winterfell, Rose Bolton felt the frost creeping into his bones. His sleep became restless. Ravens stopped returning. Farmers fled. Wildlings were spotted beyond the woods. And worst of all, his own men whispered of ghosts in the trees. Some guards deserted. A few were found skinned by Ramsay trying to inspire fear. But it no longer worked. Fear only spreads when people believe it keeps them alive. Now, many thought fear led to death. Rose summoned his remaining allies, House Serwyn, House Dustin, and the last remnants of House Ryswell gathered in Winterfell. But even they looked uneasy. The South had grown quiet since the Red Wedding. The Lannisters had problems of their own. No help was coming. And then came the second strike. In the dead of night, the food stores at Winterfell caught fire. Explosives, hidden among the barrels of grain, ignited, sending flames high into the cold sky. Panic erupted as livestock were released into the wild, and snowmelt mixed with smoke. Robb's forces never entered the walls. They only came to starve the castle. By morning, Ramsay stood in the snow, face black with soot, screaming into the wind. No answer came. Deep in the Wolf's Wood, Robb watched the smoke rise with cold satisfaction. "No siege," he said. "Let them rot." And rot they did. As the days passed, messages arrived from the east. House Glover had returned to Deepwood Mott. House Karstark, once traitors, sent word that their new lord had been overthrown, and his head delivered in a sack to the gates. The old blood of the North was beginning to remember what loyalty meant. But with this momentum came a choice. Wyman Manderly advised that they take White Harbor's fleet and attack the Boltons from the river. Mage Mormont insisted they storm the castle before the snow deepened. But Howland Reed sent a different message entirely. Sansa Stark was no longer in the Vale. Petter Baelish had secretly delivered her to the Boltons to secure his alliance. Ramsay's intended bride was a Stark. Robb's fury burned hotter than ever before. The one thing he had hoped to shield, his sister, was now in the claws of the monster he'd let escape. And now Ramsay had leverage. "I will not let her suffer," Robb said, eyes hollow. "Not like Mother, not like Talisa. Plans shifted that night. The army would no longer wait. No slow siege, no starvation. Winterfell would fall by storm." Robb sent ravens to every house, every camp. The message was a single sentence. "Ride for the wolf. The North rises now." And rise it did. From Bear Island came Mage Mormont and her, daughters with steel and fury. From the Neck came the Crannog men with poisoned arrows and swamp magic. From White Harbor rode the fat knights of Manderly, singing no songs, only sharpening blades. The Glovers, the Hornwoods, the Umbers, even clans from the Mountains of the Moon joined them. A week later, beneath falling snow, the North stood before Winterfell once more. But this time the banners bore no colors, just black cloth and a single silent sigil, the direwolf. Inside the walls, Sansa Stark watched from her tower, heart pounding. She had been told Robb was dead. She had mourned him like the rest of the world, but now, from her window, she saw the impossible. Her brother had returned, and this time, he wasn't just fighting for the North. He was fighting for her. The snow fell heavier the night before the assault, thick, blinding, and relentless, like the old gods themselves were shrouding the battlefield. Campfires burned low across the Northmen's camps outside Winterfell. Soldiers wrapped in furs sharpened their blades, whispered prayers, or sat in silence, staring at the towering walls that once belonged to their fathers. Robb Stark stood alone beneath a leafless tree, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He didn't wear a crown. He didn't need one. The look in his eyes was crown enough, raw, burning with memory and purpose. The wind tugged at his cloak, now black with no sigil, as if mourning the blood of House Stark that had soaked the North. He thought of Sansa, of the girl who used to sing songs to the birds in Winterfell's garden. Now trapped inside, engaged to the very bastard who butchered their kin. He thought of Arya, wherever she was, dead or alive, of Bran and Rickon, scattered like leaves in the wind, and of Jon, holding the wall while the world below it cracked. He had lost almost everything, but not tonight. Not her. Maege Mormont approached, her armor layered in dark leathers, eyes steely. "We're ready," she said. "If we wait much longer, the snow will swallow our path." Robb nodded. "Then we move at moonrise." The plan was chaos. While Manderly's forces battered the main gates with siege carts, the Crannogmen would slip through the hidden sally ports with Reed's knowledge of the castle's old paths. Glover's archers would take the eastern wall. Mormont's troops would scale the inner courtyards, while Robb led a silent strike team into the Great Hall. He wanted one thing: Ramsay. Inside Winterfell, Rose Bolton paced in the cold chambers, trying to hold on to his calm. His raven spies had failed him. His bannermen were shrinking. Some had slipped away during the night. House Dustin had already turned their cloaks. The Risewells refused to come down from their towers. But Ramsay laughed. He stood near the fire, skinning an apple with a small blade. "Let them come," Ramsay said, amused. "We'll skin their king again, maybe this time properly." Rose didn't share the humor. "You let her slip away once. If you let the North see her broken, you'll never be forgiven," Ramsay sneered. "Then maybe I'll let her watch while I slit his throat." He didn't know she was listening. Sansa had become quiet, composed, unreadable. But deep inside, a fire had started to burn. She'd grown tired of being a pawn, tired of smiling while her enemies plotted. She wasn't the girl who left King's Landing anymore. She had learned from the Lannisters, the Tyrells, and Petyr Baelish himself. And now, she had heard the name whispered in the wind again. Robb. When the horns sounded and the night split open with fire, Winterfell shook. Manderly's men struck first, crashing siege carts into the gates. Arrows flew from the ramparts, but Glover's men returned with precision, taking the guards down one by one. Crannogmen rose from the snow, knives flashing in the dark as they slipped through the hidden tunnels. Inside the castle, chaos erupted. Ramsay barked orders, but half his men were gone, deserters or corpses. Flames began rising from the kennels and outer walls. Bolton banners fell into the snow. Robb moved through the smoke like a phantom. Cloaked in black, face shadowed, he led a dozen silent killers through the ruined courtyard. His sword was already red. He didn't care about glory, or politics, or mercy. He was coming for Ramsay. The great hall of Winterfell was near. As they approached, screams echoed through the corridors, Bolton men fighting shadows. Robb kicked, opened the door, stepping into the hall that once held his father's justice. Ramsay was waiting. He stood beside Sansa, a knife to her throat, a sneer on his face, blood on his tunic. Well, he said, smiling, The dead do walk. Robb stopped. His eyes locked on hers. Sansa didn't look afraid. She looked ready. And then, without hesitation, she stomped hard on Ramsay's foot and slammed her elbow into his jaw. The blade slipped. Robb moved like a ghost, fast and merciless. Steel met flesh, and the bastard of Bolton screamed. Ramsay Bolton staggered backward, clutching his side where Robb's blade had carved deep. Blood soaked his tunic, his sneer twisted now into something closer to disbelief. For once, the mad bastard had no words, no clever jabs, no twisted jokes. He stared at Robb Stark as if facing a ghost, because in his eyes, that's what Robb was. A man who had died and returned for his soul. Robb didn't speak either. He advanced with his sword raised, eyes locked onto Ramsay like a predator who had waited too long for this moment. Behind him, the rest of his men held their ground, ensuring no one interfered. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Sansa stepped back, her chest heaving, but she did not flee. She stood behind her brother, eyes wide but unblinking. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. The wolves had returned. Ramsay scrambled, drawing his blades, eyes darting for an escape. "You should have stayed dead," he growled. "You're just like your father. Honor makes you slow." Robb lunged. Ramsay parried barely. Their swords clanged, echoing through the great hall. Robb struck again, harder this time, fury behind every swing. Ramsay tried to dance back, but he was already wounded and limping. Blood slicked the floor beneath his boots. "Your father died." "Begging," Ramsay spat. "Your mother? She screamed. Your wife? She—" He never finished. Robb's sword slammed against his side again, then his shoulder. Then he dropped his blade, grabbed Ramsay by the throat, and slammed him into the stone. "Call 'em." "Don't speak their names," he growled, voice shaking with rage. "You don't get to." Ramsay gasped, clawing at Robb's wrist, but Robb pressed harder. His knuckles turned white. Sansa watched from behind, frozen between horror and justice. She had dreamed of this moment in her darkest nights. Now it was real. Too real. Robb looked at her, his grip tightening, and for a moment she thought he would strangle the life out of the bastard. But then slowly he released him. Ramsay crumpled to the floor, coughing, sputtering. Robb turned to Sansa and simply asked, "Is it enough?" Sansa looked down at Ramsay, bloodied, broken. The man who had humiliated her, tormented her, tried to erase her name, her family, her identity. "No," she said coldly. "He's yours." Robb nodded. He turned to Mage Mormont and Wyman Manderly, who had just entered with soldiers. "Take him," Robb said. "Put him in the kennels." Ramsay didn't fight. Not anymore. Whatever madness had driven him was gone. He looked around the hall at the burning sigils, the dead men, the faces that no longer feared him, and he knew it was over. He was dragged out, kicking feebly, blood leaving, a trail behind him. Winterfell had been reclaimed. By morning, the castle echoed with the sounds of rebuilding. Fires were extinguished, wounded treated, dead buried. The banners of the flayed man were torn down, burned in the courtyard. And for the first time in years, the direwolf flew over Winterfell again. The North had not just risen, it had taken back its heart. Robb stood with Sansa on the battlements, looking over the snow-covered land. She had barely slept, but she looked stronger than he remembered. Older, hardened. "You shouldn't have come for me," she said quietly. "You had a war to win." "I didn't come for war," Robb said. "I came for you." Sansa looked at him, eyes filling for the first time since she arrived back in the North. "Then you came for the right reason." That night, the halls of Winterfell were silent, but the godswood stirred. Robb walked beneath the red leaves of the weirwood tree, alone. He knelt before it, his sword across his knees, and spoke into the wind. "I failed them all," he whispered. "Mother, father, Talisa. I made the wrong choices. I broke the north with my pride. The wind answered with silence, but deep within him he felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not peace, but purpose. The war was not over. The Boltons were broken, but the Lannisters still held the South. Daenerys Targaryen was rising in the east, and beyond the wall, darker things stirred, things older than any crown. Robb Stark had come back from the edge of death not to reclaim a title, but to set right what had been torn apart, and the world had no idea what was coming next. Winterfell was reborn in blood and snow. Smoke still drifted from its towers where flames had licked through the Bolton banners. But now, blacksmiths sang again in the forges. Maesters stitched wounds in the great hall. Servants cleaned what could be saved, and wolves howled at night, echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. Robb walked the grounds every morning, checking repairs, speaking to the wounded, listening to his people, not as a king, not as a commander, just as Robb Stark, son of Ned, brother to the lost, the returned, and the dead. Sansa remained in the upper chambers, helping restore the library and chambers the Boltons had destroyed. She rarely smiled, but her presence was steady. At night, Robb often found her in the Godswood, staring into the face of the weirwood tree. She never said what she prayed for, but she always looked stronger when she left. Still, Robb could feel something gathering in the air, an unfinished storm. Victory should have brought peace, but instead, it brought questions. What now? The Boltons were gone, but the Iron Throne still sat in King's Landing, dripping with Lannister gold. The Riverlands bled under Frey control. The Vale teetered in Baelish's grasp. And across the narrow sea, rumors of dragons grew louder. The North could not stay quiet forever. Mage Mormont spoke bluntly over war maps. "We ride south," she said. "Break the Freys. Send a message. The Red Wedding is still unavenged." But Wyman Manderly urged caution. "The South has no love for Starks. Not yet. If you push too fast, you'll lose what you've rebuilt." Sansa added quietly, "What about the wall?" Robb looked at her. Jon. He had heard nothing from his brother since that first raven. Silence. From the wall could only mean one thing. Something worse than politics held them quiet. They sent ravens. None returned. By the second week, Robb made his decision. He would not march south. He would ride north, to the wall. The council objected. Even Sansa questioned it. "We've just reclaimed the north," she said. "If you leave now, the houses may see it as weakness." Robb shook his head. "If Jon is in danger, if the wall has fallen silent, we need to know why. The Boltons were never the true enemy. Not really." He looked at the fire burning low in the hearth. "I've seen things, Sansa, in dreams, shadows in the snow, wolves with eyes of ice. I thought they were nightmares." She said nothing, because she'd seen them too. That night, Robb assembled, a small party. Mage insisted on joining. Glover sent a dozen men. Sansa gave him Arya's old blade, needle-thin and light. "Just in case," she said. And before sunrise, they rode through the gates of Winterfell, cloaked in black, banners hidden. Snow fell harder the further north they went. Villages once loyal to the Night's Watch were empty, fires still smoldering, doors wide open, no signs of battle. Just silence. 2 days before reaching the wall, they found a man, frozen in a twisted pose, eyes wide, skin pale and blue. No wounds, no blood, just death without explanation. Mage whispered, "This is not Southern war." The wall came into view on the 7th day, a wall of ice reaching to the heavens. But something was wrong. The gates were open. Inside, Castle Black was abandoned. Fires had burned out. Food stores were left to rot, ravens dead in their cages, and not a single soul alive. Robb moved through the halls slowly, sword drawn. Every door creaked like a warning. In the mess hall, they found signs of battle, broken tables, blood frozen to the stone, deep claw marks near the door. Not human. Something had come through the wall, or from beyond it. Ghost was the first to find Jon. The white direwolf emerged from the shadows, limping, ribs showing through his coat. But his eyes burned with life. He ran to Robb, growling, then turning and running back toward the old armory. There, beneath a collapsed beam, they found Jon Snow, half buried in snow, and blood barely breathing. Robb dropped to his knees, shaking. "Jon," he whispered, "what happened?" Jon's eyes fluttered open. His voice was cracked, weak. "They're coming." Robb leaned closer. "Who?" Jon looked past him, toward the north, and whispered, "The dead." Robb Stark stood frozen, the breath caught in his throat. Snow swirled around them in slow, falling silence, and Jon's whisper lingered in the air like a curse. The dead. Jon Snow was burning with fever, his skin pale, lips cracked, but he clutched Robb's arm with a strength born of pure terror. They breached the wall. Not all of it, but enough. Eastwatch fell, the Night's Watch, gone, most of them. We tried to send ravens, but they never left the sky. I saw them, the White Walkers, and worse. Robb didn't speak. He only nodded and stood, his mind already racing. They carried Jon back to the warmest chamber they could find, started a fire, and fed him broth by the spoon. Maege Mormont stood watch at the gate, her eyes never leaving the distant woods. Glover's men scouted the area and found only more death, frozen corpses, snow-drowned tracks, a few abandoned weapons. Nothing human remained alive between Castle, Black and Eastwatch. At night, the wind began to change. It howled, not just through the trees, but through their bones. And Robb understood something then, something darker than treason or southern politics. He hadn't come north to find Jon. He had come north to remember who the real enemy was, not the Boltons, not the Freys, not even the Lannisters, the dead. Jon finally rose from his bed 3 days later. His strength barely returned. He found Robb, sitting outside, watching the wall, a fur cloak wrapped around his shoulders. The two brothers sat in silence for a long time before Jon finally spoke. "I thought you were dead." "I was," Robb said, voice quiet. "In the ways that matter." Jon nodded, looking away. "We're not ready for what's coming." "I know." "You'll need the South," Jon said. "No matter what they've done, you'll need them." Robb's jaw clenched. "The South let the North bleed. They let our father die. They turned their eyes at the Red Wedding and called it justice. And if you don't forgive them, everyone dies," Jon said, sharper now. "You want revenge or survival?" Robb didn't answer, not for a long time. That night, they lit the beacon at Castle Black. For the first time in decades, the fire burned bright atop the wall. It was a warning, a scream into the cold, and though no one saw it yet, its light would be the first to mark. The new war. Robb and Jon stood before it side by side, just as they once had at Winterfell, as boys dreaming of glory. "We'll need Daenerys," Jon said, "and her dragons." "We'll need men who once tried to kill us," Robb added, "and we'll need to forgive." Jon looked at him. "Can you?" Robb thought of Talisa, of Catelyn, of Ned, of the child he never met, the future he lost. He let those memories burn in the fire, one by one, and then he said, "I have to." Winterfell welcomed them back with a silence filled with questions. Sansa met them in the Godswood, where snow blanketed the branches and her breath misted in the air. She looked at Jon, then Robb. "What's coming?" Jon spoke the truth plainly. The long night. From there, everything moved fast. Robb called another council. This time, he sent ravens not just to the north, but to the riverlands, the Vale, even the Reach. Each letter bore no royal command, no demands for vengeance. Only a warning. The dead walk. Winter is not a season. It is a war. At first, few believed him. Then came the first survivors from Eastwatch. Wildlings half frozen, whispering of blue-eyed monsters and dead bears that never stopped chasing. The Maesters could not explain the corpses that would not rot, nor the winds that howled even when the air was still. By the time the first wight came shuffling through the woods near Last Hearth, carrying a baby's frozen toy in its hand, the North no longer needed convincing. Robb stood before the firelit hall of Winterfell that night, no longer the ghost of a dead king. No longer a boy betrayed by lords or blinded by honor. He was the wolf who had risen not for vengeance, but for survival. Not to reclaim a throne, but to save the world. And in the shadows of that fire, Jon Snow stood beside him. One dead man. One bastard. Brothers born not of titles, but of blood and frost. The Game of Thrones was over. The war for the living had begun.